Well, thank you for being with us. We're here each day, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday and Friday, the Alan Jones Show. And you can have your say. That's the point I've been telling you. alanjones.com.au, and we'll read all of those and I'll have a selection. So today, here we go. Mike Fogarty from Winston in the ACT writes, our conflicted past is being assailed by populist attacks under political correctness. Much of our shared history is shameful, yet the sins of our fathers should not be visited on their children. Erasure of statues robs history of its facts and language of its meaning. I.C. Cameron from Northbridge over at WA writes, in this mad world of climate wokeness, I see reports suggesting a racial context in chess because the game always starts with white pieces moving first. What next? A demand to reconfigure pianos that have more white keys than black? Mike Mitchell from Ascot in Queensland writes, Gone with the Wind was a film accurately depicting people's daily lives during that time in history. Nothing will change that. To expunge it achieves nothing. And Peter Waugh from Peregian Beach in Queensland writes, perhaps ABC Classic FM will now cease broadcasting piano pieces that start on a white key, with the possible exception of the black and white rag. And look, finally, Glenn sums it all up. Glenn Angus from Whitfield in Queensland writes, I sincerely hope we never have to engage China in military conflict. I'll have nothing to wear. Very clever. Well, look, another scourge we have to confront is what's being called cancel culture. I hate the expression. It implies a sense of endorsement, something new on the scene, that we just, no matter the damage, we've got to accommodate. Cancelling history, as one writer said, is a dangerous form of denial. Denying history, I say, risks repeating it. As Rosalind Smallwood of Victoria wrote recently, leave the ugliness in plain sight and learn from it. Totalitarian regimes that erase their history are doomed to repeat the mistakes of the past. But as I've said, in the face of this, our political leaders have lost their voice. Gladys Berejiklian in New South Wales says she'll consider tougher penalties for damaging public statues. Scott Morrison described the vandalism as pathetic. That's it. These politicians need to remember the edict of Sir Thomas More. Silence betokens consent. At a time when police resources are stretched to the limit, we've got policemen and women guarding monuments. That's rubbish. We should tell 26 million Australians that the monuments won't be guarded or protected. But there will be closed-circuit television cameras installed, and anyone who goes within a breath of destroying or defacing a monument, minimum 5 years jail. Good luck. Take your chance. We've all had a gutful of this, but no, the politicians have lost their voices and apparently also their memories. Wasn't it only a couple of months ago they found their voice to lecture those enjoying a swim on Bondi Beach? Didn't the Prime Minister rightly hector a foolish public that was hoarding toilet paper? In fact, we've been lectured, haven't we, for months on all manner of issues. So may we ask what lectures are being dished out to those with a perverted view of what our society is or should be? Do we lecture the vandals, or are we frightened of them? The Antifa movement, which is at the centre of all this, takes its name from the abridged form of anti-fascist. They're just a collection of activists, and they preach the use of violence to oppose their ideological enemies. But it doesn't matter what they're called. As Helen Dale has written, Antifa especially combines monstrous privilege with what philosopher John Gray calls the problem of being lightly educated. Well, that's not a problem with my next guest. You're going to hear more from him on this program. Michael McLaren is an overnight host on Nine Radio. He's not new to me. 3 years ago, I described him as an outstanding talent, and he certainly doesn't fit what that philosopher John Gray called the problem of being lightly educated. At the risk of embarrassing him, he's here beside me, but informing you, have a look at this extract of his degree from Sydney University. Michael McLaren.
Good to see you again, Alan. Good.
Well, look, it's wonderful scholarship, but your scholarship does inform you about this whole question of the desecration of monuments. Yes. What's your view about all of this when we get a monument of Winston Churchill, written across it, a racist, and this man succeeded in defeating the greatest regime in history, Nazism?
It's an enormous irony, isn't there? If it weren't for people like Churchill, chances are you would have had more Chamberlains, you would have had capitulation in World War II, and the freedoms, including the freedom to protest, would have been taken away from these people. But leaving Churchill aside, I mean, the thing's gone mad. I read overnight that even the Little Mermaid statue, of all things, in Copenhagen has had the words racist fish written. The Little Mermaid. So, I mean, the whole thing's gone completely mad. And now you've got Columbus, obviously, in America, the descendants of the European inhabitants of America, tearing down the statue of Columbus and decapitating. There's an inherent violence in this, which I find quite disturbing as well. But don't they understand if it weren't for people like Columbus, they'd still be, generations on, stuck in Europe. And here they are in America toppling the statue.
The question goes beyond this, though, Michael, doesn't it? I mean, what are our leaders doing about it? And I know there are critics out there of Trump. I'm not one of them, because you get that Mount Rushmore speech. Mount Rushmore, of course, is a great lump of stone in which have been engraved the pictures of 4 great American presidents. And in that speech at Mount Rushmore, Trump said he protested against these people. He complained about these people who were protesting, and he said they were waging a merciless campaign to wipe out our history, defame our heroes, erase our values, and indoctrinate our children.
Good stuff.
It is, but who speaks here?
Well, that's right. He's the only one really showing leadership, except also, I have to say, Emmanuel Macron of all people.
Well, just in the last couple of days.
All people.
Quite. He said there'll be no statue removed in Paris or in France.
Just draw the line.
Yes.
Won't be happening.
But, I mean, you're in another generation from me. What is the future for Western values, Western civilisation, on which all our wealth and prosperity has been based, from which we have enjoyed enormous benefits? What is the future for your generation if we don't have leadership to stand up to these people? I mean, the corporate world won't.
Well, the future's Marxism, if we don't.
Future's Marxism.
And you look, I mean, you spoke earlier with Mark eloquently about this. You look at the Black Lives Matter movement, and you've got all sorts of organisations saying, take the knee, do this, do that. I don't know anyone who's in favour of championing racism. But I know a lot of people that are slowly waking up to what BLM is all about. And there is a very big distinction. People have to read, people have to learn. As you would often say, people have to do their homework, otherwise they'll be on the wrong tram. And I think a lot of the people supporting Black Lives Matter do it out of a feeling of compassion. They think they're on the right side here. They saw what happened to George Floyd, terrible. Yes. No one debates that.
But Michael, 89%, 0.5%, and you've got to say this slowly, 89.5% of African Americans who are murdered by black African Americans. Yes. Now, isn't it the obligation upon leaders and our leaders and everyone else to explain this exactly the same as Jacinta Price has said? Yeah, Aboriginal deaths in custody. These are perpetrated, those deaths, outside and inside the jails by Aboriginal people. Now, we are sympathetic to that. We're trying to resolve it. But you don't go anywhere by pretending, as the Archbishop of Canterbury wants people to apologise for being racists.
Intergenerational guilt.
Yes.
A very strange biblical interpretation, I'd have to say. Is there any wonder they're struggling to get bums on pews? I would argue no. But Jacinta Price, I spoke to her the other night on the program, and I think a very brave Indigenous leader, because she doesn't go with the zeitgeist. She comes up, looks at the numbers, comes up with the facts. Doesn't always fit in with the broader narrative or the easy narrative, but it's the truth. And these truths need to be told.
Just on a local matter here, and I say this lightly because people are watching us all over Australia, but there's been a big debate here in New South Wales about the Powerhouse Museum, which is a derivative of an international exhibition that was conducted here over 100 years ago. And as a result, these sorts of exhibition were features of the development as a consequence of that exhibition being held here. And suddenly you've got people like Don Harwin, who's a minister here, who doesn't know what he's talking about. None of them do. We're going to shift it to Parramatta. There's several weaknesses here, aren't there? I get tired of people referring to Parramatta as a suburb of Sydney. Parramatta is a city in its own right, and it's entitled to its own museum. But you don't cash in at Ultimo, sell it off for a block of flats, and remove a whole tranche of Australian history, do you? But you've got the concern about where they intend to build the new museum at Parramatta.
I mean, look, the current Powerhouse has some wonderful exhibits. It's got the Catalina boat, and it's got this, and it's got the steam trains and the rest of it. What I don't think it has is submarines or boats. And to be honest, if you're going to build in a floodplain, they're the sort of exhibit you're going to want. and this is the... I mean, I grew up in Parramatta, right? I mean, I know the area pretty well. No one in all the years I grew up there said, geez, I wish we had the Powerhouse Museum on the river. No one, including the council. And they know why. Because it's not a safe site. Now, there is a perfectly decent site about 1 kilometre up the river, underutilised. It could make a magnificent open-air concept museum, and that's the old Cumberland Hospital site. and the state government will have to pay $0 to acquire it. They own it.
But see, we should be reinvigorating the existing powerhouse at Ultimo so that it's a Victorian Albert Museum. It could be an international, a museum of international significance. Yeah. That's not to say there isn't a unique history associated with Parramatta which requires its own museum to celebrate and identify that history.
Well, the history of Parramatta is the history of Sydney. The history of Sydney is the history of Australia. And what New South Wales does not have is the Museum of New South Wales. Why not? I mean, it's the foundation state of the Commonwealth. Now,
so Gladys has changed direction here and been criticised. I commend her.
Good on her. Yeah.
Good on her. Good on her. She's changed direction. She says, no, Ultimo is going to stay and we'll build a new one. The problem we have, Gladys, with all of that is you're building it on the wrong spot.
Plus, two historic properties, Willow Grove and St George's Terrace, have to go. And I would have thought museums were about showcasing history. Well, why would you demolish history to build something that showcases history? That's counterproductive, I would have thought.
You see what I mean? He's smart, isn't he? Just on Eden-Monaro, you made a very, very interesting point, because I will be saying something after the break about a little bit of history of Russia and what happened with, of course, the constitutional changes. 200 recommendations made. I'll talk about that after the break. But in that vote for constitutional change, Vladimir Putin had to produce his own ID. He had to identify himself in order to vote. Now, you are saying, why couldn't we have used this by-election as a template for the future and say, OK, you can't vote without your ID?
Well, it would have been a perfect testing ground, a litmus test. You start with a by-election, particularly in a marginal seat, because if you're going to swing a vote, you don't swing it in Ku-ring-gai. You couldn't possibly fudge a win for Labor in Ku-ring-gai, no matter how hard the unions tried. But if you want to manipulate the vote, you go for the marginal seats. And I think after 10 federal elections, it's always been examined. Should we bring an ID? The Liberals tend to sort of lukewarm say
Well, I think both parties think they gain from not having an ID.
Well, quite.
Both parties have got people who vote many, many times.
The Howard government had a majority in the Senate. They could have done something.
Absolutely. They vote many, many times and are proud about it and boast about it and think, hang on, if we have ID, how many votes will we lose? The whole business about Eden-Monaro is very interesting, isn't it? Because I think there are other factors there, and you and I have talked about it, and I spoke about it on Peter's program earlier. There have to be question marks about the federal leadership of the National Party.
Absolutely. The national vote was about 5%.
Yes.
And as you said, a lot of this seat is what you would call agricultural.
Yes,
it should be
beautifully
blue
agricultural.
Ribbon, or green ribbon national, so to speak.
The other issue about Eden-Monaro, I think, is this pre-polling. Now, it is absolutely absurd that 42,000 people have pre-polled. And I've written about this in tomorrow's Sydney's Daily Telegraph. There are very strict provisions about what entitles you to pre-poll. None of these are honoured. They're not even asked any questions. There's walk in and pre-poll.
I have a little leniency in this case, in that with the COVID thing going on, I can imagine a lot of people, and there's many elderly people in that part of the world, so I won't queue up for the democracy sausage. I'll pre-poll and get out of there, right? But generally, I concur. It's got out of control.
Well, just before we go on the COVID thing, I mean, you've said, as I have said, come on, wake up, will you? We knew the cohort that was at risk. Are they trying for elimination or containment? Now, the only one, I noticed there's a theory, there's a bit of publicity today about something I said 6 months ago, and that was this business about herd immunity. Yeah. If you don't have a vaccine, then like mumps and measles, if you get the damn thing, you are immunised, in a sense. But as you say, the way we're going about this suggests that we have got some hairs on our chest notion that we're going to eliminate it. We can't do that.
Well, the problem I have is the communication around the strategy. We were told we would have a lockdown to flatten the curve, prepare the medical fraternity so that when we opened up and new cases presented, there's no idea that there'd be none, that we'd be in a position to cope. Well, I would have thought the hospitals are ready. Absolutely. The ICU beds are empty. The ventilators are all there, but they're not on. Let's open. If you have to, draw a line at the Murray and say, we'll leave them for a while. But why is it that New South Wales and Queensland still won't be travelling free of difficulty until the 10th? Absolutely. Who decides the date?
Well, who makes these up? I mean, 1 minute is 50 in a restaurant, next minute it's 2. I can't work it out.
Confusing.
But look, thank you. We'll talk to you next week.
Thank
you. This man, Michael McLaren, his name is. You can hear him overnight on 9 Radio, but a wonderful mind and a wonderful capacity to analyse and identify the issues.